My husband's parents forced me to sign a prenup. They promised I'd leave with nothing than I inherited. $40 million, and suddenly they wanted my respect. My husband cheated and planned to spend my money. I used their own contract against them and destroyed their entire family empire. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Thanks. His parents told me I would end up on the streets with nothing but the clothes on my back if I ever dared to leave their precious son. Little did they know, the very document they used to humiliate me would become the key to my ultimate freedom and their total destruction. My partner's parents were dead set on me signing a premarital agreement. They looked me in the eye and stated that the mansion belonged to Julian and I would depart with zero assets. They smirked with pure arrogance after I came into a fortune of $40 million. Right, until the moment I dropped the separation papers on the table and proved exactly what that contract guaranteed. I really should have walked away the minute his mother slid that document toward me with that condescending grin on her face, but I stayed because I was blinded by love and truly believed Julian was different from his family. I was completely mistaken. When I first met Julian, I was doing quite well on my own. I had a stable career in software development, owned a nice place in the city, and was entirely self-sufficient. I wasn't wealthy, but I never had to worry about bills. Julian, however, was born into extreme luxury. His parents, Beatrice and Sterling, ran a massive real estate empire and had pampered him since birth. They provided him with a luxury estate in a gated community, covered his entire education, and made sure he had a high-ranking executive role in their firm. He was accustomed to a lavish lifestyle that I never really cared for. From our very first date, it was obvious his parents didn't think I was good enough. Beatrice would fire off intrusive questions about my family tree, my salary, and my social standing. Sterling would barely acknowledge my presence in the room. They weren't openly aggressive, but they made it crystal clear that I wasn't the bride they envisioned for their golden child. But Julian made me feel like the center of the universe. He promised me that his parents' opinions didn't matter and that he truly loved me for who I was. Like a fool, I trusted his word. When Julian eventually proposed, I was ecstatic. I honestly thought his family would finally see my worth and welcome me. Instead, they invited us to a private dinner and caught me completely off guard. Beatrice poured herself a glass of expensive wine, gave me a fake smile, and said that before moving forward, they needed to settle a vital matter. Sterling reached for a thick folder and pushed it across the table toward me. A premarital contract. Beatrice claimed it was just a standard procedure. She sounded bored as she explained that it was meant to protect Julian's legacy and ensure that if the marriage ended, I wouldn't be entitled to anything that I didn't personally bring into the union. I looked over at Julian, desperately waiting for him to take my side or defend our relationship. He just sat there in silence, focused on his dinner plate. Sterling cleared his throat and added that this was Julian's house, his assets, and his future inheritance. If things didn't work out, I would leave with exactly what I started with. I had never once asked them for a single cent. I never even suggested I wanted a piece of their fortune. Yet there they were, treating me like a common gold digger trying to steal their wealth. Beatrice smiled and said she was sure I understood. I did. I understood perfectly well what they thought of me. I should have ended it right then and there, but I was deep in love. I told myself I didn't need their money anyway, so it wouldn't matter. I signed the paper. They looked so incredibly satisfied with themselves. The first year was wonderful. The second year was manageable. By the third year, the foundation started to crumble. Julian transformed. Or maybe I just stopped making excuses for the behavior I had ignored. He became lazy and entitled, stopped putting in any effort, and no longer treated me as a priority. Every time I tried to talk about us, he would dismiss me and call me dramatic. Even worse, he started mimicking his mother's cruelty. He would make small jabs about my appearance or suggest I needed cosmetic procedures. He acted like he was doing me a favor by letting me live there. It didn't matter that I worked full-time or that I was paying half of our living expenses, even though we lived in a house his parents bought him. In his mind, it was always his house, his wealth, and his life. I was just a guest who should be grateful for the invitation. His parents fueled this fire. They would show up without calling, criticize my decor, and complain if I moved any furniture. It was clear they still viewed it as their property and I was just a temporary tenant. Beatrice would often tell me with a smug look that I was so lucky Julian took care of me. I stopped arguing because I knew I would never be seen as an equal in that house. Then, without any warning, the world shifted. My uncle passed away. We weren't particularly close, but he had no children of his own and very few relatives left. I didn't think much of his passing until his attorney contacted me. He had left his entire estate to me, a staggering $40 million. When I shared the news with Julian, he went completely still. His first reaction wasn't comfort or surprise. He immediately asked exactly how much money it was. And just like that, I was suddenly worthy of their respect. His parents, who had spent years treating me as if I were completely disposable, suddenly could not stop singing my praises. Beatrice invited me to a private lunch, just the two of us. She beamed at me from across the table and remarked that she had always recognized how special I was. Sterling, who had barely uttered a word to me in 6 long years, was suddenly eager to discuss professional matters, asking if I had specific plans for my new wealth. Julian became incredibly attentive and sweet. He started talking about luxury vacations and investing in high-end real estate together. I let them celebrate. I let them believe they had won, while they were busy making toasts to their sudden change in luck. I was occupied meeting with my attorney and reviewing the very contract they had so arrogantly forced me to sign. It was the same agreement meant to safeguard all of Julian's property, but it did absolutely nothing to protect mine. I kept my mouth shut for the time being. I simply smiled and began orchestrating my departure. For several weeks, I played the part perfectly. I allowed Julian to think we were the ideal couple again. I let his parents believe I was finally worth their time. I sat and listened as Julian mapped out grand designs for my $40 million. He started dropping hints about purchasing a new holiday home, then moved on to remodeling his own house, and eventually suggested investing in his father's firm because it made sense to keep the wealth within the family circle. Not once did he ask what I wanted. To him, my money wasn't actually mine. That was the moment of clarity. He had never truly loved me. I was just a placeholder, a convenient partner, a trophy for his family to display. Now that I possessed something they craved, they decided to pretend I mattered. So I continued the act. I smiled at their hollow compliments. I let Julian use his charm on me. I let Beatrice link arms with me during brunch as if we were the closest of friends. Meanwhile, I was making strategic moves. First, I established a private bank account solely in my name and transferred my entire inheritance there. Julian had no way to touch it. Then I hired a top-tier lawyer to go through the premarital agreement line by line. It turned out Beatrice and Sterling were so hyper-focused on protecting their own fortune that they completely forgot to include a clause that would protect Julian from me. If we chose to divorce, he wouldn't be entitled to a single cent of my capital. I nearly burst out laughing when my legal counsel pointed that out. The very document intended to ensure I left with nothing was now the very thing ensuring. I kept everything, but I wasn't finished. I began the process of untangling my life from his, one step at a time. I collected every financial record I needed and quietly started searching for my own residence. I found a stunning beachfront estate in Loyola, which I paid for in full. Once everything was settled, I just needed one final reason to end it. Naturally, Julian provided it. He started coming home late at night. Initially, I thought he was just busy with work, especially since he was trying so hard to convince me to make joint investments. But then, one evening, his phone lit up while he was in the shower. I took a quick look. There it was. A message from a woman named Elena, saying she couldn't wait to see him again and that their last encounter was incredible. I felt surprisingly numb. There was no agony or shock, just a cold sense of finality. I scrolled through their history, finding months of messages, photos, and secret plans. This had been going on for a long time, likely even before I inherited the money. I realized then that Julian wasn't just chasing my fortune, he was trying to secure a future for himself before discarding me. He thought he was the one playing the game, but he had no idea what was coming. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I hired a private investigator. If Julian wanted to play dirty, I was going to play much smarter. It didn't take long to get results. Within a week, I had a file full of photos and videos showing Julian with Elena at various hotels and bars. He was looking at her with a passion he hadn't shown me in years. It was perfect evidence. I took it straight to my lawyer and told her I was ready. She smiled and said, "Let's do this." One night, Julian returned home in an excellent mood. He kissed my cheek and started rambling about some business opportunity his father wanted us to join. That was the moment I slid the divorce papers across the dining table. He looked confused and asked what they were. I told him to read them. As he flipped through the pages, his face shifted from confusion to pure terror. He tried to laugh it off, saying I was joking. I wasn't. He shook his head and reminded me that I would get nothing because of the prenup. I then pulled out my copy of that same agreement and pointed to the exact clause my lawyer had highlighted. The one stating Julian had no claim to any assets I acquired during the marriage. The color drained from his face instantly. He started frantically searching the pages for a loophole that didn't exist. I told him that while he and his parents made sure I wouldn't take their money, they forgot to make sure they could take mine. There was total silence. Beatrice and Sterling weren't there to save him this time. He was completely on his own. And I still had one more surprise. I tossed an envelope onto the table and suggested he look at the contents. It was the high-definition photos of his affair with Elena. He went completely still. I smiled, grabbed my bag and keys, and walked out of the house. I no longer had to pretend that place was my home. I didn't hear from Julian that night or the following morning. Then my phone lit up with a call from Beatrice. Not Julian, not Sterling, but his mother. I watched her name flash on the screen and let it ring 3 times before finally answering. She immediately started screaming, asking how I could do this to her son. I almost laughed and asked what she meant. Leaving him? Exposing his infidelity? She snapped that I was ruining his life for the sake of petty revenge. It was truly ironic. I reminded her that she was the one who forced the prenup on me and made it clear I was an outsider. Yet now she was furious because I was actually leaving. She told me I would regret this and hung up. The following days were suspiciously quiet until my lawyer called with news. They were contesting the agreement. They actually had the nerve to claim the contract should be nullified because of unfair circumstances. I burst out laughing. Unfair? They were the ones who wrote the damn thing. But Sterling and Beatrice weren't just arrogant. They were powerful and well-connected. Now that they realized Julian was walking away with 0% of my $40 million, they were desperate to find a way to stop me. But I had anticipated this move. I had one final card left to play. The day of the court hearing arrived. Julian and his parents showed up with a team of 3 high-priced lawyers. I walked in with my attorney and a forensic accountant. While they were busy trying to find a way to steal my inheritance, I had been busy digging into their corporate history. What I found was explosive. Shady offshore deals, massive tax fraud, and hidden assets. Beatrice and Sterling had been cooking the company books for decades, and I now held every receipt and proof of their crimes. When their lawyer smugly argued that the prenup was lopsided, my lawyer leaned forward and placed a thick stack of evidence on the table. "Before we discuss the contract, Your Honor, we have a different matter to present," she said. I watched Beatrice's face turn ghostly white. Sterling stiffened. Julian just looked lost because he had no clue what was happening. The judge reviewed the documents, looked up, and asked the Carters if they understood the gravity of these findings. Beatrice physically swayed in her seat. My lawyer continued, noting that since Julian was listed as a high-level executive, he was also legally implicated in this financial misconduct. Julian finally spoke up, stuttering that he didn't handle the finances. But his parents wouldn't even look at him. They finally understood the reality of the situation. I wasn't just walking away with my money. I was dismantling their entire legacy. Everything unraveled at lightning speed. The judge refused to toss the prenup, meaning my $40 million stayed mine. Meanwhile, Sterling and Beatrice were suddenly hit with a full-scale federal investigation. Their house was gone, the business was frozen, and the reputation they spent a lifetime building was shattered into pieces. I walked away wealthy, free, and completely untouchable. Beatrice's threat about me regretting my choices echoed in my head, and I realized she was the one living that regret now. Julian tried calling me repeatedly, first with anger, then with desperate pleas to fix things, and finally with tears. I ignored every single attempt. The tax authorities swarmed their company, freezing every account. Their elite friends vanished overnight. I later heard they were forced to sell their massive mansion just to pay for their legal defense. The house I once lived in, the one they said I'd never own, went into foreclosure. Months later, Elena, Julian's mistress, actually called me. She sounded livid, calling me every name in the book. I just leaned back in my chair at my new home and smiled. I told her I assumed Julian hadn't mentioned he was broke. There was a long silence, then a bitter laugh from her end. She complained that he had promised her a life of luxury, but now he had nothing. I didn't feel a shred of pity. I just asked what she expected me to do about it, reminded her he wasn't my husband anymore, and hung up. I don't think about them much these days. Word reached me that Julian eventually moved back in with his parents, but not in a luxury estate. They're stuck in a small rented condo with no company, no wealth, and no status. Meanwhile, I moved into my own beachfront paradise in Loyola. It's paid for in full. No toxic in-laws, no unfaithful husband, and no one telling me I'm lucky to be part of their world. I didn't need their world because I built a much better one for myself. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. What do you think about this story? Share it in the comments.